Formula One promised us closer racing in 2022, but have they been able to deliver on that promise in the first two races of the season? I want to delve into the statistics and look at what's happened between 2021 and 2022 with these new Formula One cars and whether or not the racing has actually improved. So first of all, the changes that have come in are a huge regulation boost for 2022. The tyres have changed completely. We're now at 18-inch wheel rims, completely different to what we were working with before, which means the teams and Pirelli in particular have had to change up the way they look at tyres completely. We've also got tyre covers now as well to kind of reduce the turbulence that comes off of those tyres in Formula One. Ground effect is a huge change that's come into Formula One this season. This is basically aerodynamic drag that is underneath the car and allows for suction underneath the car to try and assist with some downforce where they have had to lose some downforce because of the changes in the wing design. And basically, this is the biggest change that has come along. If you look at the wings in comparison to last year, it is a huge regulation shift. The wings are completely different to try and reduce the amount of dirty air that comes off of these Formula One cars and allow them to race a little bit closer, even in those higher speed and slower speed corners. And then finally, the cars are just much, much heavier. The safety features that have been added to these 2022 cars is incredibly important, obviously, but has meant that these cars get much, much bigger and also much, much heavier over the course of Formula One. If you compare 2021 cars, they're much, much smaller. And then if you look back 10 years or so, these cars look absolutely giant in comparison. But these four big regulation changes that I've talked about were in the hopes that these Formula One cars would be able to follow each other closer and there would be closer racing between the teams. So first of all, I just wanted to look at the times that each team put up in 2021 and 2022. Obviously, Bahrain, we've been to both years. Bahrain, we went to first race of last year, first race of this year. So it allows us quite a good comparison between the two. If we look at Bahrain in 2021, Lewis Hamilton, fastest lap was a 1:34 dead. He went on to win the Grand Prix, but the fastest lap overall was Valtteri Bottas on a 1:32.0. Now, that 1:32.0 is kind of a little bit of an escalated one because Valtteri Bottas came in, went onto the soft compound tyres super late on in the race and basically put in that lap just to steal the fastest lap point off of Max Verstappen, as you can see, who finished in second place. But I wanted to have the top 10 because if you look down the bottom there, Lance Stroll, 1:34.8, was actually only 8/10 off the winner, Lewis Hamilton, in terms of the race pace and the fastest lap that he could put in. Whereas now we look at 2022, Charles Leclerc puts in a 1:34.5, so it's 5/10 off of Lewis Hamilton's winning pace last year. But if you look at Joe, all the way down there on a 1:36.6, that is a huge gap between first and last, a 2.1 second gap in particular between those two. And Leclerc was faster by a huge margin in comparison to those teams behind. So it's interesting to see that actually there's a little bit more of a gap in terms of all of the teams' overall pace, but Ferrari kind of are in an island on their own in 2022 there. Like, if you look at Lewis Hamilton, only in third place is a 1:36.2 as well. So maybe Ferrari are just that outstanding candidate in this 2022 season. But you can see overall, if you just look at all the times and compare the drivers or even the teams that are the same over the course of those two seasons, the 2022 cars are much, much slower. And that was kind of what we wanted. We weren't bothered about the cars being quicker. The 2021 cars were designed to be as quick as they possibly could, to be a spectacle of speed, but not necessarily a spectacle in racing. And we can see the differences between the two here. And I've stolen this dynamic from Project Formula One. I will leave a link to him down in the description because he has some sensational stuff over on Twitter. It really is worth checking out. But this is just his comparison of Verstappen's Grand Prix pace in qualifying in 2022 and 2021. Obviously, I wanted to pick Verstappen and he picked Verstappen for good reason because, you know, the Red Bull is in a similar sort of position. It's the second fastest car you'd imagine in both of those seasons. Second behind Mercedes last year, second behind Ferrari this year. And of course, Max Verstappen is the same driver in the same team with a similar kind of hardware you'd imagine around him. So Verstappen's comparison, if you just look at those top speed areas, it's the really slow corners where these 2022 cars are struggling to keep up with their 2021 counterparts. And it looks like those slower corners are really the issue for Red Bull this season as well. But a 1.6 second time difference between the two. Like, these 2022 cars are much, much slower. And the reason behind that is because actually the top speed on the straights is fairly comparable. Even though they are a bigger car, they're still revving up to the same kind of top speeds, but they're having to brake a lot earlier. They're carrying so much more momentum. You can see there that Max Verstappen, even though his speed is creeping up to where it would have been before, if you look at the throttle percentages and also the gears that he's hitting, you can see that he's having to get on the brakes much, much earlier in this season's car than he was in last season's car. So there's definitely a big shift in the braking point and the braking zones that these cars can stop within. And he's still trying to hit those same apexes. It's the same corners, but he's having to get off of the throttle a lot earlier, not even hitting 8th gear, only getting into 8th gear once in the 2022 car in comparison to the 4 times in the 2021 car. And again, that might be, an engine issue, an engine ratio dynamic that Red Bull need to sort out over the course of the season. It was only their first race with that new car, but it's very, very difficult to see these 2022 cars really getting up to the level of the 2021 cars in terms of their pace. And it was a similar story actually in Saudi Arabia. I've got the times here. A 127.6 from Max Verstappen in comparison to 2022 where he did a 128.4. So another gap of 0.8 seconds. And that gap a lot smaller in Saudi Arabia because it is a much faster track. So, that thought process of these cars being not quite there in the slower speed corners is definitely following a little bit of a pattern over the 2 races we've seen so far. But as I said, we're not too worried about these cars being that much slower. As much as, it's lovely to see Formula One cars being the fastest cars that they can possibly be, has it led to better racing? Has the pack actually got closer together? Now, in terms of times that we've looked at, clearly not. Joe is much further away than the running pace of a Charles Leclerc in comparison to Stroll to Lewis Hamilton at the front. That gap has definitely increased a little bit. But if you just look subjectively at the races so far this season, at the fights we've seen in these first 2 races, I would say that off the bat, it feels like the races have been better for fans. And, we've had Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen battling in the first 2 races of this season, and they've been wheel to wheel for multiple laps at a time. And I think that's the real thing. These cars can finally follow for more than a lap. We were looking at last year, and Lewis Hamilton would have 1 attempt to get past Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen would have 1 attempt to get past Lewis Hamilton. If we look back at Bahrain in 2021, Max Verstappen had that 1 shot. Obviously, he overtook off the racing line and therefore had to give that position back, and he could never get anywhere close to the Mercedes again. You had 1 shot at that opportunity to get in front of the car in front of you. But actually, if we look at 2022, he had multiple chances to get past Charles Leclerc, and then Charles Leclerc had multiple chances to get back at Max Verstappen as well. So in terms of the battling that we're seeing, it's a lot more dynamic. There's a lot more to the battles that we're seeing in these 2022 cars. And we even saw that with the Alpines in Saudi Arabia as well. There was lots of opportunities for Ocon and Alonso to go side by side down in towards turn 1. And it was lap after lap after lap. It wasn't just that 1 lap opportunity that each car was getting. If we actually look at the numbers of overtakes over the course of the 2 Grand Prix. If we look at Bahrain in 2021, there were 75 overtakes, not including lap 1 and pit stops. So I kind of see lap 1 as a bit of an outlier, and pit stops obviously are a little bit strange because you gain a position, but you haven't actually gained that position on track. And then if we look at Bahrain in 2022, similar kind of things, not including lap 1, not including pit stops, there were 77 track overtakes. So 2 more overtakes in the 2022 season. So a similar number of overtakes, but there's a huge outlier in there. If we take Sergio Perez in 2021, obviously started at the back of the grid, and he was one of the absolute big boys. We take him out of the scenario, and we also take the 2021 Haas out of the equation, because Mick Schumacher, even though he was the only Haas out there, he did get overtaken by everybody quite a few times. If you take those 2 outliers out of there, you actually drop down to the on-track overtakes being in the 40s in comparison to the 77 that we had in this year. So overall, these cars look like they are delivering on this promise of much, much closer racing. I think the only thing for me, and I'd love to know your thoughts on the comments below about this, is DRS for me seems like it might be that tad a bit overpowered now. I think it's still necessary. I think it's still a thing that we need in Formula One. But again, if I look at the numbers of overtakes and I look at where those overtakes happen, DRS is a massive, massive play here. And obviously, because DRS is a thing, the drivers wait until they have it. Yes, that makes sense. But also, because DRS is a thing, you are almost guaranteeing yourself an overtaking opportunity as long as you are within that 0.8, 0.7 of the car in front of you. And that seems to me just like a little bit of an inconvenience. Now, we saw Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen literally try to outbrake themselves in Saudi Arabia to try and let the other one go through first so that they could get the DRS down into turn one. And I don't know if that's an aspect of Formula One that we want to see. I don't know if we want to see drivers almost giving up the position because they know they're going to be able to get it back more easily down into the next corner. It seems like a strange dynamic to have. And it was the same in Bahrain. Charles Leclerc even said, you know, he let Max Verstappen through at turn one because he knew he'd be able to get back in turn four. Do we want drivers letting overtakes happen because they know that they're going to have that huge benefit later on in the lap? I'd love to know your thoughts. DRS for me seems like they're a little bit of an outlier here and was much more powerful in the 2022 race than it was in the 2021 race, although all of the overtakes on track pretty much came from DRS in both cases. But I'd love to know your thoughts overall then in the comments down below. Have you thought that the racing this year has been a little bit closer, has been a little bit better in terms of times? We could argue that it hasn't been. In terms of actually on-track overtakes, we could argue that it has been. But where do you stand on that argument? Where do you think those two come into one another? And what's your thought process behind that? Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like whilst you're down there. Subscribe. As I said, check out Project Formula One. He's got some incredible statistics. I'll leave a link down in the description below. And I'll see you next time.